discourage them. All right, guys, we might as well get started. It is a couple minutes after.
Hopefully my internet connection holds up.
It is, yeah. And then we'll see as people join, but it is being recorded. So super excited to have everybody here and to be joining along. Going to be a great learning session. So is Chad on here? Because he was supposed to be on as well, right? Not yet.
I don't see him.
All right. That's all right. It's going to be a mastermind, which is, as we know, a little bit more informal. So if everybody's come with their questions, whether they're specific or vague, then we have a couple of local experts here, John and Alex, who have very willingly and graciously donated their time for this morning. So thank you so much, guys.
Great. Yeah, I'll try.
Oh, you got this, Alex.
Yeah, I've sold lots of vacant land. I've never been on the, I've yet to do a purchase. I think I've sold like 11 or 12 lots.
What do you mean purchase? You mean
like I've never helped a buyer buy a vacant lot, but I've listed and sold probably a dozen or so.
Oh man, I've sold more land in between January and May than I sold in the last 14 years.
Really?
Yeah.
So why do you think that swing happened, John?
Everybody from Ontario couldn't buy a house, so they had 50K to buy a piece of land.
Okay, Alex, I have a question for you, since you were saying that you were always on the seller side of the land. So when you list the land, what's your criteria of information to get from that seller? Because I find a lot of sellers don't really know about their one piece of vacant land.
They don't. I usually put boots on and go walk it, see what it is. Is it a bog? Is it a incline? How big? And then I just start going from basically, where is it? How useful is it? Is it got like, does it have 150 feet of road frontage and it's an acre and a half and it's in a high developed area like Prospect, like Powers Road or whatever?
Right.
Or is it landlocked and water access only? And
so what if it's not marked? Like what if the you know, the pegs or whatever, you know, the survey markers, I guess is what I'm trying to say, aren't readily you know, noticeable, like, and they don't have a survey. Do you ask them to go get a survey?
You would pretty much have to.
Yeah.
I've yet to run into it like that. Honestly, most I've have at least you've been able to identify an old blaze, or a lot of times, like way back in the day, if they didn't pound a stake, they really slashed a tree. You find like an old tree with a big slash mark in it. Sometimes you can even see like the old paint in them.
Yeah.
And those are usually going to mark your corners. Apart from that, yeah, you'd have to ask them to get a survey done and spend some money to at least, especially if it's not obvious. Like if it's groomed lawn, tree line, groomed lawn, you can kind of guess that's roughly the property bounds. But if it's just raw land, they'd have to do some work first.
Right. Oh. Yeah.
And I tend to sell big chunks of land that have never been surveyed. So I go onto POL and get the GPS coordinates on the corners and then go out there and put a little flag and tape. At least you're within, you know, it's fairly close. I've gone and done that, and then it's been surveyed, and I was within, you know, 5 feet of where the survey markers went.
So where do you get, what did you just say, the GPS coordinates on property online?
Yeah, you go to the map section, and then you go to the map, and then you hover your mouse over the corner of the map, each of the corners of the map, and write down the latitude and longitude.
Well, I just learned something today. Okay, I'm signing off now.
You can also usually if you read the deed too, it'll usually on the last page or so, it'll give the meets and bounds like of all the lines in verbal.
Well, yeah, but I mean, do you know how to read that? I don't.
I can't read some of it because it's cursive writing from the 1800s.
But I have seen that, you know, to the northwest, whatever, and blah, blah, blah. But I mean, to me, walking on that piece of land, that would mean nothing.
Yeah. So what I do on those big ones is I have a drone. I get really high up and I fly the drone, and then I use viewpoint a lot because it's overlaid the Google satellite. The POL maps are overlaid the Google satellite. So at least from a satellite point of view, you can sort of, as long as sometimes it deviates by like a quarter of an inch, but it's gotten much more accurate over the last couple of years.
I've done that too.
Yeah, you can zoom in and sort of see at least what the things are that are close by and make a guess.
Yes.
NSA are messed up by not buying viewpoint, because I use that all the time to figure out where the property is, and I bet you 95% of the time I can find the property marker, and it's some friggin' close.
Yeah.
But that's the same. That's the same. When I was saying that you can get the GPS coordinates from POL, it's exactly the same thing. So that's why it's so accurate.
Yeah, because they're getting it from there probably, but
yeah.
Anyway, yes, I go on viewpoint a lot. I hate to say it, but I do.
It's great for land.
Yes, it is. Yeah, I agree. There's Chad McLeod. No, JJ, not real.
Chad McLeod, as always. Sorry about that, guys.
Welcome, Chad.
All right, thank you, Janice. Hold you guys up. Hopefully, you started the party without me.
We did. We were just talking about vacant land and how do you actually find it when there's no survey markers.
Oh. That tree over there to that fence post over there, the big rock in the corner.
Yeah.
It's real handy when you sell land to people and they've never seen it and they never see it. They don't even see it. So I sold 11 lots in a subdivision down here, and none of the buyers set foot on the land before it closed.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's what I've seen.
It's been a bit abnormal year.
We're back.
All right, what did we cover so far, guys?
Just how to find corners, like using POL or using viewpoint and surveys and not surveys.
Right. Yeah.
So basically, Chad, I asked the question, how do you know when you go on a raw piece of land that there's no visible markers? How are we, like if it's not obvious, the only other thing besides what John just said is to have it surveyed, have the seller, because a lot of sellers do not know where their markers are.
100%. That's and sometimes in new vacant land, people ask, is it a legal requirement to have a survey? And no, it is not. The surveyor initially drafts the legal description of the property. And if you've ever seen a legal description of the property, it's in writing, and it tells you, to what bearing and degree it's on for a certain length to a certain point, and then it changes direction and so on until it creates a closed circuit. And some boundaries, most easy boundaries are rectangles, right? 100 feet that way, 50 feet this way, 100 feet this way, and 50 feet back to the place of beginning. That's the easy one. You can use rough sketches like Property Online or Viewpoint Realty that uses Property Online to create their mapping functions and in conjunction with the legal description of the property, but it's anybody's guess, and you can't rely on that, especially if you're ready to make improvements on the property, right? If you're going to start putting on a foundation or building a shed or putting up a fence, putting on a driveway, you absolutely need a survey.
Yeah, if you've got a building lot that's 80 by 100 or something like that, you got to survey it. But down here, if you want to survey a piece of land, you're waiting a year. And some of them you just go, well, you can't survey it because it would be a 3-mile blaze line to the back of the property. It'd be like $25,000-$30,000 to survey the property.
Yeah.
So people just sort of survey the road.
A seller of mine just got I think it was a 72-acre parcel surveyed, and he sold it to Canada Nature Trust. And that's one of the requirements is they want a fresh survey, and he was just a hair over 15 grand to survey it.
Yeah. How many acres?
72.
Rectangle?
No, like a peninsula kind of thing.
Wow.
All old timber.
Yeah.
Like Nature Trust is buying up land all over the place, especially.
Yeah, I sold 2,500 acres to them earlier in the year.
I don't have anything. I don't have.
One thing, when you're talking about surveys, I had buyers who were looking at a piece of land and they were using Viewpoint as their visual, like this is where the markers are, but between Viewpoint and POL, they had missed a chunk of it, a chunk of the land, and it was backing onto wetland. So then you have to watch for your wetland and how much of it was actually usable space. And was it registered wetland with Department of Environment? And so there were just so many layers to it that they decided to walk away because they didn't actually know how much that they could use, because they couldn't actually access the water because they couldn't build anything over the wetland to get to the water.
I ran into the same thing. This spring. That's what as much as it sucks, because usually you're dealing with a $15,000 lot. Like the buyer's conditions to buying vacant land to make sure it's usable are intense. We were looking at a piece of land in West Hants, which is littered in dike land, which is the same thing. You can't touch it. And we had an accepted offer on 16 acres with 1,000 feet of water frontage, and come to find out 14 of the 16 acres were considered dike land, not usable.
Yeah.
We could get a special permit to get a driveway across them, but that was it. So we pulled the chute on it, and then I think it's still sitting. I mean,
so Alex, how did you find that out? Was it like, how did you find that out?
Well, first, when we started working through due diligence, I contacted the municipality because we started to go down the process for permitting and driveway and getting in touch with the DOT. And anyway, I eventually was like, well, I grew up down there, so I knew about it all. Like dike land's a major thing. So I found an overlay map that showed it. And then once I contacted the Dike Society in Truro, they basically told me like hard no.
So where'd you find this overlay map?
Oh my God, Holly, I don't know. I don't know the URL. It was like down a rabbit hole with like a link through like the West Hants land use bylaw.
Oh, okay.
So like some zoning overlay maps and then some dike land overlay maps, because it's a big deal down there, the dike land.
There's a wetlands and marshlands site on all of the municipalities' sites as well, that you can take that map and overlay it to see, you can get a general idea anyway to know where the registered wetlands are.
Learned two things today. Yay.
Someone was saying that over the next year or so, they're going to have a new map that's going to have all the flooding, water hazards, shoreline stuff that's going to be available. But I haven't heard anything. Someone told me that yesterday.
Yeah.
Yeah. John, what market are you in?
I live in Shelburne, which is in between Yarmouth and Bridgewater.
Yeah, gotcha. So we've got David James on as well, and David's down in the Annapolis Valley in the Colebrook Kentfield area. Alex is originally from the West Hants area, right, Alex?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so one of the things that we all really have to be aware of is not to sell outside of our area of expertise, and that's when you don't know things you should know.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so John's some things that would be pertinent to his marketplace. Alex just ran into dike land situations, and it's because, well, that's the things that an area specialist would know.
Yeah.
Right. David's down in agricultural land, and there's a lot of different rules about what you can and can't do, especially when it comes to farmland and financing farmland, discharging farmland with farm aid financing on it and such like that. So my recommendation is, if you're going to start taking business, make sure that it's within your wheelhouse and it's not too far removed from your market, where you don't get situated where you help somebody to buy a piece of land that they have an idea that they're getting 14 usable acres and only 12 or 16 and only 14 or 2 are usable.
Mhm.
Right?
Well, this actually just happened at the beginning of this call, Chad. I was asking John about property down on Surratt's Island, which is about an hour past Shelburne.
Right.
Because I had buyers in Ontario reach out to me and he's like, oh no, tell them no. And he told me why. So now I have that, and I would have no idea. And I'm not going to drive 3 hours for a $20,000 piece of land.
Yep, that's why you refer it off to John.
Exactly. So if they were interested in that area, absolutely. That's 100%. I agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So
Chad, you just mentioned ag land when you mentioned David. Another big thing we should all know, because I mean, especially us, like up Halifax way, like the agriculture band goes right through to Musquodoboit. So a lot of people, my parents ran into it when they built their house years ago, and I have heard of a buddy of a buddy who bought a piece of land next to a farm, didn't do his due diligence, acre lot next to a dairy farm, unable to build on it because you have to be more than 1,000 feet from an active livestock dwelling. Unable to build on it. Now what are you gonna do? Sell it and try to like swindle somebody else? Like
Sell it to the farmer.
Yeah,
that's all you can do.
for 10 cents.
He probably sold it in the first place.
1 acre to a farmer isn't worth.
Yeah.
They'll give you a couple of grand for it.
Yeah, maybe.
So with that in mind, for those of us who are relatively new to the business or just new to vacant land, how on earth do we uncover some of these nuances? Like, is there a resource for us to use? A site that kind of, I mean, we're talking about municipality, but it sounds like it's a lot of hunting and digging and just
step by step
moves to try to get to answers.
I mean,
and have that, I mean, is there no disclosure that they have to make a legal disclosure? Because I know we have a PDS for a house, but do we not have something equivalent for vacant land?
Yep,
that's
we do.
legally required to disclose?
There is a vacant land PDS, but they're not required to disclose it.
Well, same with the house PDS.
Right. But the other thing with vacant land is sometimes people own land and they have no idea.
Mhm.
Right. They have no clue. They've inherited the land or
Exactly.
they bought it up when they were trying to do an investment and they may have never, ever set foot on that piece of land.
Yeah, that falls into all of mine. So most of my land that I sell, people haven't been on it in
Right.
years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have another question regarding like sort of rural areas. Even like out here, actually well and septic is what I'm getting at. So I thought, and I don't know why I thought this, but I thought that you had to have at least 6,000 square feet to have what?
33,000.
Okay, well, so the little, so Chad, you might know this one, is the little tiny piece of land on Club Road. So we're driving out and it's on the left. That is 4,874 square feet.
Yep.
But it has a well and septic. So how'd that happen?
So every new, and I don't know what year this came in, I'm going to say late 1990s, my best guess, maybe early 2000s. The regulations changed when you create a new lot. The creation of a new lot, so long as the geology of the land fits the criteria, the smallest your property can be is 33,000 square feet. That's a Department of Environment set criteria. So if the engineer can go in there and design a septic system that can function within 33,000 square feet, then you'll get the lot approval. But that's the minimum size for well and septic now, if you create a new one. However, Department of Environment cannot go in and tell a landowner, oh, I know you have a lot, but you just can't do anything with it. It's zoned for residential and it's got its own PID, but you can't do anything with it. So they could not do that. So they had to grandfather it in to say, if you have an existing lot that predates the change in the regulation, then you could, so long as you could get an engineer to sign off on a design that can actually go in onto one of those lots,
Okay.
you can build on it, and you can have a well and a septic system, believe it or not. Now, towards First Peninsula down in the Mahone Bay area, is anybody from Mahone Bay area? Okay, I've seen a number of properties along the shoreline there that have maybe 1,200 feet of front lawn, and that's where their septic system is. Right.
Good Lord. Yeah.
So Department of Environment now, I don't know if you all know who Dean Walker is, but he's part of the wastewater.
Oh, yes. We
Yeah.
do.
Most people know who Dean is. He's Atlantic Water Investigations, and he's a geoscientist. And I do a lot of business with Dean because I respect his knowledge. But he's on the board of Wastewater Nova Scotia, and what they do is they assess different septic system designs. And at one point, we were so limited as to what we could put on our properties for septic systems. Some of them were these great big expansive raised mound systems that were 75, 100 feet long, and they were $25,000 and $30,000 to construct. But they started looking at wastewater. Nova Scotia was going around North America looking at different models of on-site sewage disposal systems. And so they started adopting new systems that could be able to fit on smaller land in different applications, especially wetland. I look at a wetland parcel of land and think, how did they ever get a permit for a septic system there? Right? But you can, and it's just because of the type of system that's designed for that particular application. So there's 2 new ones that came to town not long ago. There's an Elgin system, and then there's the peat moss system, and they're both good for confined spaces, very small land areas. So, and sometimes you just have to have holding tanks. So I see a lot of like fishing villages around the coast. And John, you probably see this a lot down around the Shelburne area where people have very, very small parcels of land in these little villages that a lot of them I've seen have holding tanks, not full septic systems.
Oh, let's not get into septic systems.
Yeah. Or it's just a 4-inch piece of ABS going out into the bay.
Yeah, or it's a ring well or an old steel tank or an old 50-gallon barrel with a pipe going out.
Volkswagen Beetle upside down.
Yeah, exactly.
But you can't do that now, though. I mean, if something.
No. What's there in the past is grandfather. I got a house that I'm just selling now, and it's got a cesspool with made out of well rings, and it's been there for. The owners have been there for 50 years, and it's got a small field bed, and they've only pumped it twice in 50 years, and everything works fine.
Wow. Amazing.
So will they be able to continue with that, or will they have to change that?
Well, it's grandfathered. It's grandfathered.
Oh, so okay. I thought once you could continue with it if you were the original, if you're the owner, but once you sold it, you had
it transfers as well.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
So long as it does not malfunction and doesn't cause any breach to the environment. That's
right.
Criteria. If all of a sudden it's breaching and somewhere and spilling off into the environment, then yes, they will force you to do something about it.
Are most septic inspectors aware of this grandfathered bit of business? Okay.
Yeah.
Hopefully they are.
All right.
Yeah.
So that's kind of when you're outside of the city, guys, and we're talking about more. The topic is going further towards properties outside of the city on their own well and septics. Right? So when we're dealing with vacant land, there's all different types of scenarios that you're going to encounter. So if you are buying outside of the city, well, it gets a little harder because you have to figure out, can you get a well and septic on that? And does most of the clients that I've worked with have elected to have a perk test done, or an engineer drop into the lot where they dig a hole, and it's usually 5 to 6 feet deep, and they're looking at the geology so that they can design the appropriate system for that particular lot. So usually you can hire an excavation company to go out for a few $100, and for less than a few $100, the engineer will go out there and they will determine what type of system can go on that lot, and that lot can actually hold a on-site sewage disposal system. So that's one of the things that I would say 95% of the clients that I've worked with in purchasing lots, they exercise that particular condition, because you want to know what's going to be my budget for a septic system on this lot, right? You're looking at a sloping sand filter system, I've heard them going, some of those going in for $12,500. But the average sloping sand filter system for a 3-bedroom home is about $16,500, right? So that's what you need to expect. Now, the engineer may come back and say, okay, well, here's a little bit of an issue, because when we dug down, we were only 3 feet to the water table, right? Because if it's a relatively level piece of land, we got down 3 feet. Now we have to raise the system out of the ground. And it all depends on the elevation of the house. And are you going to have a bathroom in the basement? And are you going to have an effluent pump in your basement to pump it up, because water doesn't go uphill on its own? So it has to be a gravity fed system. And if the water table is only 2 to 3 feet below the surface, then they have to raise the bed above the water table, 12 inches above the water table. So the system has to be above grade at that point. And then you may have to get into a pump chamber or a siphon chamber. So these things have to play into the fact of how much is my budget to buy this lot, and what are the improvement costs over and above that. And the septic system usually is the biggie, right? It's the one that most people really need to know, because it can range from 12.5 to 25, right? And that can affect your building budget.
So Chad, does that also play into the engineered design? Like when you're looking at getting that done, like having somebody come in, do an engineered design, that kind of maps all that out?
It does, yeah. So the original assessment is, yes, we can put a system in here, and this is the type of system that we would put in. Now, in order to get that design, the engineer will go away, design it specific to your house, whatever you're thinking about doing. It's a 4-bedroom. Okay, in order to do a 4-bedroom on this piece of land, this is the type of design, and this is the type of design that could go here. And then it's up to you. Well, what's the benefit of this one as opposed to that one? And the engineer will tell you. And then if you decide, okay, yes, I want that, then they'll go away and they'll actually design it. To do that, they're about $1,200. They'll sell you the septic design for $1,200, and that's the one that gets submitted to the Department of Environment with the report from the engineer about the geology and other outside factors. You know, they have to take into consideration, where is your well going to be, where is your neighbor's well, because they have to take that into consideration, because a septic system has to be a minimum of 50 feet from a drilled well and 100 feet from a dug well. Okay, so they take all of these external factors into consideration when they make the application to development or to the Department of Environment for the approval, right? And most of the time, the Department of Environment, that's just more of a formality. They see it come in, they stamp it, and they send it back approved, because everybody that's issuing these permits to the Department of Environment are licensed and qualified engineers to design these septic systems. And a lot of times the Department of Environment take the engineer's recommendation only. They don't have the background the engineers do. So if you say that it can go there, then that's good enough for us.
Approved.
Yep.
Yeah.
So the other thing about vacant land, a lot of people will not. How about water, guys? How do you know when you buy a piece of land, vacant piece of land, that you're actually going to get a well supply, a water supply? Does anybody know?
Hire a deveiner guy. Come in.
That's one way.
The witch and stick.
Yeah,
Witch and stick.
that's one way. Yep.
Like, gosh, that's a great question, Chad. Do we have an answer for that?
I've without getting permission to drill a well during your conditions, I've looked, if you're lucky enough, I've looked at nearby properties through the well data log base to see what other wells in the area that are logged are yielding.
Yep.
Should help give you at least an idea. If the neighbor 300 meters down the road has a 200-foot well that's yielding 6 gallons a minute, like, odds are you're going to have fairly decent water.
Alex, what did you call that database?
It's the well data, what is it?
Nova Scotia
the well log database.
Yeah. What they had since, what year was it, Chad? Since then, any drilled well has to be put in it. Since 2008 or something like that.
I've gone. Yeah.
I think it's later than that.
Yeah, it's too. Yeah, I've seen them as early as like early 90s.
If it, yeah.
But not. I've seen wells not even registered that were drilled within the last couple of years. So it gets a little frustrating, but
yeah,
that's the exact answer that I was looking for, because you do have the right. If you look at our vacant land schedule with our attached to our agreement of purchase and sale, it does allow you to send in a drilling rig and drill for a well and to make sure that you're going to get the sufficient supply of water from that piece of land. You have that right, but who's going to spend $8,000 and then walk away from a piece of property, right?
Yeah.
Most people, and I'm going to say all of my clients, when I've sold vacant land, not one of them has exercised their right to go on the land and drill a well. Not one.
No.
I think I've had 2 or 3 that have done perk tests.
Oh, is that right? Yeah. Oh my heavens.
Yeah, like you imagine being conditional, drilling a $10,000 well, realizing you have no money or have no water, and then you got to walk away from a deal and like you're out 10 grand.
No.
Yeah.
Bury tanks. That's the best way to get water.
Yeah. Right on. Yep.
Yeah.
On that note, Chad, I was just working with a buyer, and there's a piece of vacant land that we were looking at. So we went out and viewed it, and I guess there used to be a derelict cottage there, and it's been taken out. But there's a brand new well. Now, the people that own it right now have had it for about a year, a little less than. And there's a brand new well, but there's no power to the lot. So the casing's in, the cap's on, there's no plumbing, there's no power, probably not even a pump at the bottom of it. So, what do you do with that then too? You can't even take a water sample. You've been told it's been drilled to 300 feet. It's in sort of a lakeside subdivision, of acreage lots and that, but it's like, that's a bit of a mystery too.
I've got out a string and a washer and dropped it down the well.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, you can do a static test, see where it's sitting.
Yeah.
interesting.
You can see when you can at least know the depth and know where it's wet on the string. You'll know the depth of the water, and then I've also taken samples out of them by dropping something that's heavier down and just pulling it back up.
Yeah. So is everybody familiar with what a plumb bob is? Plumb bob.
No, sir. No plumb bob.
Okay. No plumb bob.
You
Plumb
never
bob.
install the door, Holly?
What?
You never install the door?
A door?
That's what you use plumb bob for.
Oh,
So
yeah.
It's a carpenter tool. Anyway, you can use a plumb bob. Generally, a lot of people do because you put it on a string and you lower it down the well, and you keep going and going and going and going, and you can measure the depth of the well that way. So, David, were you saying that the well itself was not accessible, or does it have a cap that could be removed?
It was easily accessible. In this case, it was in the corner of the lot. You could see the casing, the caps on it, and it was just not, commissioned yet, basically.
Right. So if you want to know what the potability of that water is, you can definitely put down a pump and discharge it. That's happened before. I've sold properties that have wells and septics on them, but no dwelling, no building at all. So similar to yours, you're going to get the old cottage that's going to be removed. But how do you know whether the existing infrastructure is workable, like the well and the septic? And if the well has potable water, yeah, you can bring out a generator, you can put a pump up there, and you can pump it out of the well if you want to. And Dean Walker's done that. I've done a lot of foreclosures, and I'll be doing a foreclosure session later this month. I think on the 16th, Janice. I think I'm scheduled in. So what happens with a lot of foreclosures is there's no power to them, right? They're not safe to turn on. In some cases, the power is not safe to turn on. So how do you get a water sample to the bank when you're going to finance it when they say they need a potable sample? And that would be how. You bring a generator out with a pump and you discharge it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a good idea. Thanks.
Yeah. So that's the approach to on-site sewage, septic, and water for vacant land. Let's talk about some of the geology and slopes and physical barriers to developing a piece of land. So Alex and John, you guys are in around the coastline too.
Yeah. It's definitely like it matters. Like if you want to build a split entry house, but your lot is a giant slope, I mean, odds are like every different lot kind of demands a different style home. Like you mentioned, Chad, in the last one of these, I think you did, your clients wanted to do a 2-story, and it ended up being, it was a flat level lot, so it ended up being the tallest house in the county.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we're trying to talk them into building a split entry design because that's the perfect lot for a split entry design. But the wife was adamant she wanted a 2-story. And it's possible, but the problem is the lot doesn't match the style of the house. And that's a harder thing. You usually match the house to the lot, not the lot to the house. And when you do that, now, Holly, are you still on? Yeah, Holly, you're there.
Yep.
Well, you've seen a lot of the things that they did down on your development off Linwood. Like, I mean, I heard Matt Presti's sister brought in hundreds of loads of fill in order to make that house work on that lot.
Yes, and the other guy, the one that's building the big CIF, or is it CIF, or you know what I mean? ICF, yeah. He had to bring in a ton of fill too to do what he wanted, but that's the whole thing. Like what you're saying, some people will buy the lot, but they won't not necessarily listen to the best house that fits that lot. They want their house to fit that lot, the house that they choose to fit that lot. Do you know what I'm saying?
100%.
And, you know, maybe it wasn't the best, you know, house to choose. Now, the ones that on the other side, you know, they had, because most of the ones on the lakeside, they had their own builders.
Yep.
Right. And well, this guy's actually building up. But anyway, yeah, they didn't listen to or didn't get somebody in to say, this is what you should have on this lot. This is the best house to build on this lot. I know for a fact that a lot of them didn't listen. So not that that meant anything to me, but this is just conversations having with these new neighbors of mine.
And that's the thing. I mean, if you have a certain house design in mind,
yep,
and that is what you're set on, then you have to try and find a lot for that style, right? If you want to have a walkout basement, well, you have to have the right slope for walkout basement. Otherwise, you have to lift the house out of ground. And like Alex alluded to, we had one built on the on Pockwalk Road, and they had to lift the house 6 feet out of ground. And I said, well, you understand that when you build this house, you may not be able to envision what's going to go on there, but I've seen this many times. And I've actually given streets, like a street in Whitehouse. I said, go up to that one and take a left on Tottenham, and your third house on the left-hand side is what you're going to get here. Make sure that you drive by and have a look at that, because you don't want to be surprised when your house is built and you're like, ooh, that's a tall, ugly house that stands outside and you got 15 steps to the front door.
Yeah. Like,
so
I've explained to people with Raymar, like down here on Powers Road where they're building, like if they're lot 1 on Hargrove, the reason the facsimile is for a split entry on that is because it's a level flat lot, and the next door neighbor that's sloping down towards the water, the facsimile on it is a big estate style 2-story. And if you want to buy that next lot and put a split entry on it, well, they do. I mean, they're big enough. They just say no. Like,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
is there a resource, again, because I'm always looking for resources, but is there a place to go so that we're working with clients that say, I specifically want this kind of house, that it can say, okay, here's the kind of lot that you need to accommodate that kind of house, or vice versa?
So you as an agent may have that knowledge. I've been around new construction long enough that, yeah, I have a fairly strong knowledge about what designs fit on what lots. But unfortunately, I don't recommend the average agent just, guide that person. It would be best to get in an excavation contractor to tell you, and it would be best to get an experienced contractor, right? Because they can tell you. And the house that I had built off the Pockwalk Road, I worked with Marchand Homes on that one, and Jeff and I and their project foreman, I can't remember, the excavation contractor, we met on the lot first, and we talked about the slope that was back to front. So they wanted to have a walkout basement. It just, the slope didn't work the way the garage, she wanted it to be on the left-hand side of the house, the kitchen on the north or the southeast side of the house, because she is from India, and there's good karma when you're with natural light and solar exposure. And we had to design this house around that. And it made it really challenging. So all we could do is say, all right, we can do this, but this is the nature of what you're going to get. You had to have a stairwell, concrete stairwell into the basement. It's not going to be walkout to grade unless you lift the whole house right up out of ground. So that was, Jeff was definitely pushing for a split entry. And she just says, Stop talking split entries. I hate them. I'm not going to live in one. I want a 2-story, and this is what it's going to look like. So we worked around it. It cost them about $6,500 extra to bring in fill, to be able to grade around the foundation and slope everything away and make sure that the water ran away from the house and there were no issues, and it kind of backfilled the foundation. So you're not looking at so much foundation. So, and we had to do some different things. We had like 6 steps from the garage up into the house. So we had to modify the plan and add 2 feet to the front of the garage, which was cheap. It was only like $3,000 or $3,500 to add 2 more feet to the garage. But that solved the problem with the staircase being in the way from them pulling their car in. So we had to look at all of these things with the design of the house so that we could fit the lot to this house and what it would look like in its final physical being, right? Had to take into consideration. Now, to get up into the house from the garage is on grade. You have 6 steps to get into the house. Now you've got 10-foot ceilings in your garage, or even a little bit higher. And you've got 6 or 7 steps to the front door. And the walkout basement has to be on this side because the grade is left to right and front to back. So it kind of slopes front and then right. So that's the place where we had to design the walkout for the basement and design the whole basement finished area based around that. So there was a lot of things to take into consideration. And it was all modification because of the type of lot that this had and the style of home that they wanted, right? If it fits your budget, like Holly was saying, all these people bought on the lake. Well, if you're not worried about a budget, then no problem. You can do whatever you want and just, make it work. But if you have a certain budget that you have to be within, then this is all the important information that you have to find out ahead of time before you make the decision to buy, because you don't want to buy a lot and then not be able to build on it, or not build what you want, right?
Yeah.
So that's the importance of the due diligence and investigation up ahead of time, right?
Another thing I've run into, like the next tick on the buyer's obligations, is driveways. You gotta make sure at the DOT that you can have a legal driveway to your lot, and don't trust the one that's there. I had a buyer. We just bought a lot out in Tatamagouche this year that had a little cottage and stuff on it that he's going to build a house on, and it was heated. It was competition. He wanted to waive everything away from my suggestion. Anyway, the driveway that's there is not legal. It had to be, when he actually had to have the DOT come out, the driveway had to be, he got lucky. It just needed to be extended. It didn't need to be moved. But he could have been up Schitt's Creek, literally, if they didn't approve a driveway to that lot. So definitely get DOT involved and come out and do a sight line and make sure that you can get onto your piece of dirt.
So
Yeah, I have
Alex,
lots of.
no, go ahead, John.
I've got lots of places, a lot of vacant land where there's been a driveway in the past that it could have just been for logging it or something like that. And like Alex said, you have to have 300 feet of almost unobstructed sight line on either side of where you're going to plan on putting a driveway in. So if you got a curve in the road or something like that, or a rise and a fall, you have to be careful you won't get one. And I've got one piece of land, and it's on either side of the highway, but it's on a controlled portion of the highway where the speed limit's 100K. And, basically I'm going to have to terminate the listing because there's no way they're ever going to get any type of access to the property.
No. There's also an old wives' tale that I used to hear all the time growing up. Like, you'll get approved if there's a driveway directly across the road. Like if they got it, you're like, that's not true.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good to know.
For the same reason, right? One's a house and grandfather, and the other one isn't.
Exactly.
Okay. So with that in mind, Alex, like there's properties that have been popping up within Halifax that it looks like they had begun doing work. So this one property that I'm looking at for a client already had a septic drawing done, and there's already a driveway with a culvert. So even in that situation, not really safe, should due diligence go get that done?
Or ask the seller if they have the documentation from it all being done. If they
Right.
have current
Yeah.
documentation from when the driveway was done or the septic was done, then that, I mean, in my mind, that's checking the boxes.
Yeah, so they have the paperwork for septic, but they didn't offer anything up on the driveway.
You could contact the Department of Transportation and go down the slight rabbit hole. They'd probably be able to tell you. Like, and I've had one done, the seller didn't have any documentation on the driveway, but once I called the municipality or the DOT, she went down the rabbit hole and found out when and who did it and said, yes, it was a legal driveway that's registered with us.
So Alex,
Yeah, that's
because you're so helpful, you'll have that information posted here later, right?
Call the DOT. You're all right now.
Nothing.
Big department, that DOT.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm just kidding. Kind of.
Yeah, I'm not kidding. Anybody wants to put any information up on this chat to help me out, by all means, fill it up. I'll take all kinds of great notes.
All right, so your guide is basically the agreement of purchase and sale. That's your guide just about in every transaction. If you're not experienced in doing a certain type of real estate, whether it's condos, whether it's vacant land, new construction, resale, whatever, just make sure that you partner, or you keep in touch with somebody that does have experience. I mean, we're all on the panel, so obviously we would be open to and welcoming your calls, but get your brokers involved. Okay, I'm doing my first deal here, and I think there's a lot of people that have mentors here now, so make sure your mentor has the experience or whatever, and just lean on them. For the most part, the agreement of purchase and sale does cover most things, but if it's something that's foreign, then you might have to lean on somebody with the experience to get you through some of the other unforeseen hazards in a transaction that you might come along. But going back to the agreement of purchase and sale, Alex, sounds like you have a copy of it right in front of you there.
I have the land schedule in front of me, not the APS.
Yeah. So with the land schedule, you look at, what is it, 3.1 buyer conditions,
like improvements.
So there's a section of that talks about that the seller is going to provide curbing, power, utilities, sewer, all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah. Yes. 1.1 seller shall provide prior to closing, blah, 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 blah. Street paving, curbs, sidewalks, service to the property line, sewer service, water service, storm drainage, etc.
Right. So my question to everybody is, when would you use that section?
What do you mean? When would you use it?
When would you fill out that section of the vacant land schedule?
Every time.
If it was in a subdivision where that stuff is already done, because you're not gonna, if you're selling a piece of land, I don't know, in Prospect, that's not no one's going to be paving the street or putting the power in or any of that stuff, right? So or putting a culvert in, you'd have to do all that if it's not there. So I would say, if it's in a subdivision that's already kind of done, like mine was.
What about like a new construction, maybe?
Yeah, like a new development that's selling lots that aren't held by a builder, but the lots never had services to it. It may still be a dirt road with curbs all around it.
Exactly.
So I put that stuff in every offer because it's, at least it makes the buyer aware of the fact that most of them are coming into without knowing any of the issues they're going to deal with, and at least if it's there, they've at least read it, hopefully.
But you put it, you mean you tick off all of those boxes, because that's just part of
it. It's up to them to do it or not, right? So I always like to give them, to make them aware that they've got all of these decision points that they have to make, and I check them all, and 99% of the time they don't do anything.
But if so you would tick off the seller will put in a sidewalk?
No, the buyer. Only the buyer. The sellers don't work. Down here, they don't do anything.
Right, but I think Alex, you were saying the seller before closing will do, right? So what
So if you're representing a buyer on a new construction subdivision in town on municipal services, like if it's going to be a cul-de-sac that's paved with curbs and sidewalks, and you're buying the lot in the back that in the road's yet to be paved, yet to be serviced, that's when you would check all those boxes.
But it won't be done before closing though. A lot of those cases, right?
It has to be.
Yes.
So in Alex's case with that, in that example, I sold a lot out in Brunello Estates there in Timberley, and they just put the newest Amalfi Way in Brunello Estates. They were just the road hadn't been paved yet, and I made an offer on behalf of one of my clients on a property there. So I had to include all of those things in my vacant land schedule that the developer was going to provide these services.
Right.
And that's so, and yes, they said, okay, yeah, we're definitely going to put in the curbs and the sidewalks, and we're going to pave the road and bring in utilities and water and sewer and all that kind of stuff. That's the developer's responsibility. And that's when you use that particular section of the vacant land schedule. However, this was all subject to, and they have to by closing, you would, not necessarily, but I wouldn't personally close. So Holly, you have experience because Holly's family comes from a development background. You can sell a piece of land, but you can't close on it until they get final endorsement and the PID is registered with the land registration database.
Correct.
So the municipality, in this case, we're dealing with HRM, and I'm not sure how it goes in Lunenburg County or Shelburne County or down in Kings, Queens or whatever, but in Halifax, you cannot start, they will not issue you a building permit, and you cannot close unless you have the PID registered and that subdivision is actually endorsed. And Holly, that's where you pull out your hair as a developer, right? Because trying to get that final signature from HRM, right?
Oh yeah, that was nightmarish.
So persnickety on the smallest detail, but that box has to be checked before they give you that final endorsement to go ahead and start building, right? So, but in Holly, in your case, I looked at some of those waterfront lots for us and our kids, and we contemplated buying them, and we walked the lots when you guys cut the road out. Right. It was only, we walked through kind of stumps and foliage in order to get to these, but we could have made you an offer at that point. And when that happened, I would have used that first part of the vacant land schedule.
Right. Because none of it was done yet, but you wanted it to be done. Exactly. Yeah.
None of it existed. So I would make sure before we closed that all of that was in place, that you were responsible for. And I think you guys were even responsible for putting in the culvert ends, weren't you, for the driveways?
Yep. The culverts. Definitely. Yeah.
So those are the types of things that first section covers. So that's more so before a subdivision is endorsed and in its final stages, right? That's when you use that section.
Yeah.
But not on a regular piece of vacant land. You're not, the developer or the seller is not going to put in a power pole, or they're not going to put in a culvert. Well, there might be a culvert there, but yeah. So just a regular piece of land, you're not ticking off those boxes because the seller isn't going to be doing that.
No.
But I typically cross it out.
Yeah.
So there are some cases where, do you guys know where, Alex, you can help me out with this. Beyond Ski Martok down in the valley, there's this cottage country.
Yeah. Falls Lake Resort.
What's it called?
Falls Lake Resort.
Okay. I sold a lot.
Yeah. There's three of them: Falls Lake, Chalet Hamlet, and Cottage Country, I think.
Yeah. So I sold this lot off one of those, and my clients were just going to do it sight unseen. Like, they walked it and they loved it. They fell in love with it. I was supposed to meet them. They forgot to meet me. So I was there, waiting around for almost 45 minutes. They didn't show up, but they still wanted to go ahead with the offer, and they wanted to do, unconditional. There's nothing really I want to do, right? It's a beautiful big piece of property. We just want to buy it. It was only $27,000 anyway. But I said, do you guys realize that there's no power to this lot? Like, the closest power source is way down on that road and way down on that road, and you're right in the middle. You've got about 3 or 4 power poles before you even get electricity. I didn't realize that, didn't notice that. So that was a conversation that we had to have. Now, we could have put that in the agreement of purchase and sale, that before closing this at the seller's expense, they can have the power poles brought to the property and the utilities brought to the property line so that you can connect. That's something you can do before you commit to buying. They didn't care. We knew the approximate cost of bringing power poles up that road, and it was going to be cost shared with everybody else that needed to tie into those power poles along the way. Nobody else had built at that point. They had like travel trailers and seasonal recreation vehicles there with generators they were running for power. They didn't care about being on the grid at that point, but something that you definitely have to keep in mind.
Yeah. One of those out there, I thought where you were heading is actually Bearland condos. So you don't actually own the Falls Lake Resort is all like a trailer park.
Okay.
Yeah. That's what a lot of people don't get either. They see these cheap, in their minds, cheap cottages on a lake, and then got to realize like, well, no, you don't own the dirt.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. So the other thing about vacant land. So going back to the regular due diligence that you would often exercise, look at the inspection. You get to do an inspection of the lot. So what do you guys think that entails?
Didn't even consider that one would happen. So outside of a visual inspection by the buyers and maybe me.
So I kind of joined a little late. I had somewhere else to be that was Blue Nose well drilling. So I don't want to repeat anything that was already said. So thank you everybody for being here. Would that include like the perk test and the soil, that type of thing to make sure that, you know, a septic tank and things like that can be put in there?
So there are specific clauses for that in the agreement.
Or like engineering, have like an engineer be able to do a site approval? Would that be part of that as well, maybe?
It wouldn't necessarily, it could fall under the umbrella of inspection, but there's specific clauses that deal with drilled wells and septic approvals in that. So Alex, did anybody ever do an inspection of a lot, or John, when you guys were selling lots?
Like
we do inspections, you know, walking them for, you know, so you can get a driveway culvert put in, but you know, where do you want to put a house on it, and how are you going to get down there? And that's what a lot of the inspections that happens on my properties, where you're buying 50 acres and you're by the road and you're marching through it all to find a path down that's where you don't have to, you know, how much is a driveway when it's half a kilometer long down to the ocean? You know, that can get you know, 40 or in some cases, it's more expensive than the lot I'm selling. So, you know, figuring that stuff out is important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. No one ever did like an inspection on any of my lots per se, but yeah, like did all the due diligence, like the perk test, doing the test pit, having like an excavator contractor walk it, talk about where driveway should go, roughly how much, that stuff. But what do you mean by inspection?
Okay, so that's one thing that a lot of buyers, they don't understand. How do you inspect a lot? So that's a general term, and that's a process that it involves different characteristics, which would be a site inspection, just basically the physical attributes of the piece of land. Does it have boulderous rock outcroppings? Well, if it does, and that's the place that's the best sitting for the house, I got to look at chipping or blasting now, right? That costs a lot of money. What about, oh my gosh, I got to the back, and Holly, are you still here? No, she's gone. Holly in her development, there was an old wagon road. It used to, back in the 1940s and 30s, used to be old cars. All right, you buy a house or you buy a lot and it's full of old junker cars. That happens, and you know, they abandon these things and the trees grow up around them and through them and in them, and oh my gosh, you know, I don't want the idea of potentially an environmental issue with all of this antifreeze or oils or whatever spilling out, or maybe there's old oil drums people just discarded. You got to look for things like that. How about abandoned wells, right? What about an abandoned well, and how do you deal with that? Right. Another inspection that I always ask my my buyer clients to do is poke around with an excavator. When they do the perk test, they're going to know a certain amount of information by doing that, but also where you're going to build your house or your garage, because you need to know what's underneath the surface. Because if you're only guessing it's all good soil, and then it just happens to be soft, and they dig and they dig and they dig, and there's like, whoa, we don't have firm soil to build on. What do you do then? What happens when you don't have stable virgin soil to build on? What do you have to do?
Start hauling in rock.
Get bigger footings.
Yeah. You
Dig
have to.
way down, dig way deep down, start bringing in probably 12-inch stone, then 6-inch stone, then start compaction and bring her up so you have something to build on.
Right. You have to get an engineered pad. Right. So a friend of mine bought privately. He didn't do this. He didn't work with me on this one. Now I helped him because he screwed up, and he called me and he said, oh, I got a big problem and I need your help. So, well, it's too late. You've already given this guy a deposit and you have an unconditional agreement of purchase and sale. You're buying this lot, whether you like it or not. He said, but the excavation company showed up and they said that I now have to have an engineered pad. It's going to cost me $10,000 more. That's putting me way over my budget. And this was in 2003 or 2004. All right. I said, well, you should have called me before you bought the lot. You just thought you knew what you were doing. And it turns out it cost you $10,000 extra. Right. So that's what they did. As Alex said, they brought in a bunch of surge and they have to compact it. And an engineer actually has to sign off. They have to approve the materials going in. They have to watch the process and they sign off on, okay, it has been done. I certify it. You can go in now, because they have to do live and dead load evaluations. What type of structure is going on there? How many bathrooms, how many occupants and all that kind of stuff. Because you can imagine if you've got your bathrooms stacked on 3 levels, right? And you've got a bathtub on the main level and a big corner jacuzzi tub, and you fill those things up. That's what you call the live loads of a house, right? And you're putting more strain of potentially, what are those corner jacuzzi tubs? 30 gallons, 40 gallons, 50 gallons, 10 pounds per gallon. You got 400 or 500 pounds in a tub, plus you are, putting that kind of load on your footings and all on your structure. And you have to make sure that the base will support all of that. And that's what the engineer designs for you and issues that permit. You can go ahead now and build. But how do you find out about all of this stuff before you commit to buying that lot and making sure everything falls within your budget, right? And that's what
That is the question.
That's what the inspections are for. Yep.
So who do you reach out to for an inspection then? Like home inspectors, that's easy. You just, home inspectors, but who do you get a hold of to do a vacant land inspection?
Most of the time, I just recommend you get a hold of a building contractor before you decide to build. Most experienced building contractors can do that or would be willing to do that for you before you ultimately make that decision. However, they're doing it in good faith that if you decide to build, you would consider them for the build. Excavation contractors are usually my go-to. Can you drop over to this lot so we can talk about the characteristics of it? Maybe do some digging around under our conditions of the agreement.
Yeah.
Right. And the other thing again is digging in the area where you're going to put your buildings, right? You want to make sure that you can have a solid foundation there, that you're not putting in an engineered pad. And on the other note, you're making sure you're not running into a lot of rock, because if you run into bedrock only 3 feet down and you want an 8-foot basement, well, you got a lot of chipping and blasting to do.
Yeah.
Right? And that's expensive when you
that excavator gets a lot more expensive per hour when the breaker goes on it.
Yep, 100%.
Yeah. There's a lot to it. Just keep selling $500,000 resale houses. It's way easier.
It's the easiest way.
Make a lot more money a lot faster. Yeah. One other little funny thing I did run into in the backwoods with a lot is the confirmation of utilities. I mean, Chad mentioned NS Power not reaching one lot. That doesn't stop there. I mean, especially this day and age with the internet, like make sure if your people are internet people and they need it, make sure that they can get internet to the property as well. We had to terminate a deal on a piece of land because Bell and Eastlink, neither one of them would service the lot.
Yep. We just closed a house on Friday past out in Indigo Shores of all places. There's a whole street called Gray Birch Drive Lane, whatever it is. Gray Birch. No resident currently there has internet and won't have internet access for over 3 months. So these people are moving in and they're working from home and they don't have a way to connect.
Into the one of the highest fluting subdivisions in the city right now.
Yep.
Yeah, and it's weird because, you know, where I am here in Shelburne, if you have in the municipality of Shelburne, which is, it takes you, you know, it's an hour to drive around it easily. And every single house with a power meter has bell fiber.
Yeah.
Is that right? Yeah, makes sense. Well, you're probably going to see all the residents of Grey Birch, you know, parked around their neighbors trying to steal their Wi-Fi. Hey, Janice, look at you. You're magic. Check her out.
Hey.
Yeah. Who's that lady up in the
I
corner?
figured I'll join from here. I didn't know if I was host of the so I left my computer running at the house while I dropped one of my kids off at an appointment.
Yeah.
So I'll just sit on the other chair over here.
No problem. That's funny. Yeah. So yeah, those are the types of things that you need to confirm before anybody pulls the trigger on and waives all conditions to commit to buying a lot, realistically.
Yeah. That or get them to sign that waiver that's saying that you suggest that you did. And
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So actually, that's about the long and short of vacant land. There's some anomalies out there that you'll run into, but for the most part, we've pretty much covered all the things that you need to do and be aware of if you got buyers looking at vacant land.
Yeah. Well, I think the only thing we didn't touch, I mean, which is zoning, which 75% of the time is fine, especially with residential.
Yeah, you guys with the city, you guys have way more issues you have to deal with than I do down here, right? I mean, everything can be, it can be residential, commercial, or resource, and it's, you know, the rules and regulations down here are fairly simple when you're outside of the city.
Yeah,
but then you have to come 2 hours. You have to drive 2 hours to get here. So
yeah,
right, yeah.
I have a quick question, and if it's already been discussed, just let me know. It's good. What about vacant property, vacant land where there's already a current well and septic that's really, really old? So I actually just had one, so we don't even know how old it is. We didn't know a whole lot about it. And anyway, so we included it, cited like whereas, just selling it whereas, as is whereas. And didn't include the well and septic. We didn't do that at all. We asked for no well and septic inspection as the price doesn't reflect that there is one there. So long story short, old wells and things like that, they could be a negative as well as a positive. Like anything you guys want to touch on that? Old wells, positive, negative, how you would advertise a property that has an old well?
I've sold a whole bunch of them where they've had well and septic, and there was a bunch of properties here where they've been owned for 30 years by people where they built a little shed, they brought power in, they put a well in, they put septic, and they put an RV on it in the summertime. So, you know, all those things are there. You know, I look at wells as always being a positive. You know, if you can test it and do a flow test on it or something like that, having a well is great. And septics, you know, down here, we don't have anybody that does septic inspections, you know, other than the guy who pumps it and puts them in. So we uncover the tank and have a good look at it. But, you know, we have to bring people from the city for septic inspections here. But I think if you got it inspected to find out what type of tank it is, and then they do an inspection on the field bed, you can get ministry of approval from it, as long, you know, and they're going to say it's only good for this type of house or this size. And so, but you could probably get it, you could probably get it inspected and approved for a certain size of house. At least that's the way it would work down here.
Yeah. Yeah, we did go over like the well stuff and septic stuff existing a little bit.
Cool.
Like Chad said earlier, I mean, you can test a well even if it doesn't have a pump, like dropping something heavy down, measuring your string, seeing the depth. You could even like if your static level is not too low, you could somehow get a cup down with a string and pull some water out to test it, or you bring a generator in with a submersible pump, pull some water out of it. Yeah.
Okay, so it would be a benefit to maybe look into that because it could be additional
Yeah.
revenue for the property. Okay, thanks, guys.
So going back.
All right, I gotta go.
Okay.
Yeah. See you, John.
See you
All right.
guys.
Thank you, John.
Okay, take care.
All right.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
So going back on zoning, that was the last, that's one of the last conditions in the standard agreement, Alex?
Yeah. Apart from subdivision approval or environmental assessment,
Yeah,
which you don't run into a whole lot with residential.
right. Again, doing your inspection on a property, and you find, some old oil barrels that like 45-gallon drums that have been dumped on the property years ago, or old cars, a cluster of them on the property, or even the adjacent property. If you see that going on, the guy next door that's got a slew of old cars rusted in the back of his property, and you're going to buy next door and you're down slope, might be something to consider.
Then you should.
Yeah. So, you could consider an environmental assessment, which brings in a special engineering specialist specifically to identify with some problems with maybe toxic substances, right? Making sure that there's no old light fixtures with PCBs in them, and old cars that are going to be leaching antifreezes and things like that. So you can do an environmental assessment, but they're expensive. It takes a while for them to do. So most people, unless there are those red flags,
Just
often
waive it. Yeah.
don't exercise their right to do those.
Mhm.
So zoning, talk about zoning in specific cases.
I actually had one, an R1 zoned lot. So there's residential 1 unit, but my guy wanted to build a cottage on it. It was way out in the boonies. And it actually, as per the municipality zoning rules, an R1 property was not did not allow a recreation property. Could you get away with it and call it a house? Yes. But it was enough that my guy was a little timid, and we ended up terminating on it because the municipality said, "Oh, we can't give you a permit for a cottage on it, only for a house." Like, that was a pretty minimal one, but like, I don't know, Chad, like you probably see it more like if somebody wants to have like Holt's, like a store with residential above it, like you can't just build that on any lot.
Exactly. Yep. Anybody that's got a specific use in mind, and you hit on the home-based uses or home office uses, home-based businesses. That's one of those things that a lot of people are doing now. I want to work from home, and COVID has really propelled that concept at this point. But you got to make sure that the zoning and the bylaws tying into the zoning, the zoning might allow, but the bylaws don't. So talk about Aaron's relative's place on Bayview there, Alex, when it came to the zoning of that particular lot.
Yeah, I forget the actual name of the zone. It was a residential zoning, but I think it was RB1, which does allow. What's that? Oh, yes, that one was I1, wasn't it? So that one was
very, very desirable to have, by the way.
Yes. So it was allowed to have a home-based business, which he did at one point in time. But there's rules involved, like you're not allowed to have signage. Oh, sorry,
He's on a rabbit. He's on a rabbit. Go get him.
That was awesome and terrifying all at the same time. I was writing notes and just about jumped out of my skin.
Yep.
So that zoning is really interesting.
It is, because it's light industrial zoning. That's I1 is light industrial zoning. So Alex and I had that listing about 3 years ago. We worked through it. One of the things that you have to deal with is highest and best use when we talk about valuing properties, right? Whether it's vacant land or whatever it is, you got to look at its highest and best use. So we're like, whoa, hang on a minute now. This has different zoning than everything else in the subdivision. This is going to create more value. So we can't just, this was a bungalow with a garage in the back. Nothing unusual about it, nothing standing out. It was just like every other house in the neighborhood. However, it had I1 zoning and none of the other houses did. So we said, well, we can't do a direct comparison on this because we have to factor in this has a use superior to the rest. So how does that factor into value? So we had to start looking into highest and best use and assigned some value because it had light industrial zoning.
Sorry, Beagles.
Yep.
What dollar value did you put on that?
We didn't have to. Now that's subjective. The dollar value, and Janice asked me, what kind of dollar value did we assign for that particular application? So where we were going with, just because it's zoned, you have to look at the correlation between the zoning and the land use bylaws and the covenants that protect an area. Okay, so that's where we ran into the snag, eh, Alex?
Yeah. Like you were allowed to have your home-based business there, but the advertising rules were extremely strict, opening times and stuff like that. So we didn't really give it a value. It was definitely a plus to somebody, but it was, like you said, subjective. Like to the right person, it's a bonus, but to the majority of buyers out there, they didn't really care.
So the problem was, just because it was zoned I-1, they agreed when they signed with the developer that they would conform with the existing restrictive covenants that the developer put in place, not the city.
Mm-hmm.
So it eliminated all of the I-1 criteria because when they signed the deed and they accepted those covenants, they agreed to abide by those covenants, which said residential single family use only.
Yeah.
So it just scrubbed all I-1 applications. So we couldn't assign a value. Now going back to assigning a value, so that's the thing. You can't just take it at face value and say, oh my God, it's I-1 zoning. Look at all the extra uses, and we're going to get a ton of extra money. So if you represent a buyer to buy a property that has that type of zoning and don't look further and deeper into it, they might buy a property figure in I-1, you could have welding shops, auto body shops, woodworking businesses, all that kind of stuff.
They could have had like in I-1, you can have like a waste collection legally, but
right. So all of that. So if you were a buyer and you're like, yes, that's the property I've been waiting for, and bought it, and then come to find out you're not allowed to have all those uses there on that property, you've just bought a property, you can't do what you intended to do with it. Right. So you got to go a little bit deeper to make sure. So we looked into the restrictive covenants, and the restrictive covenants were signed after the zoning designation of the property, and therefore trump the zoning bylaws with the covenants. So the covenants restrict them from doing anything business related, single family use only in the entire subdivision. Okay. What would we have done to assign a value? Then we have to go outside and look at other I-1 zoned properties. What did they sell for? Right? What kind of values are they? And then you kind of have to look at the cost approach to what you've got there. Right? If an I-1 lot sold up the street, what did it sell for? Okay. Then you have to bring that information in over to the subject property that already has a house and a garage, right? Look at the difference of the land values and then assign a value to it, right? So if the I-1 lot up the street, let's say, sold for $160,000 because it has commercial use, and down here, it's only $80,000 for a building lot for residential purposes, well, you've got an $80,000 differential.
If you're allowed to use it for that purpose. As for your question, Iris, a lawyer might look into it if you ask them, but I would do the due diligence yourself.
Yeah. And you can get to, that's the one thing that concerns me the most when it comes to closing a property and it's subject to title review. Because if anything comes up like, oh, wait a minute now, I can't use this because my lawyer just told me he brought me the restrictive covenants and I can't use this property the way I had hoped. On closing day, they can terminate the deal and walk. Because that's a valid objection to title.
Okay.
So don't try to hide anything.
Yeah. Dig deep, man, dig deep. Get into all the details. Make sure you have an informed buyer or seller.
So how typically or normally, like how long the buyer will get all the satisfaction about all those conditions? Like we talk about the vacant land schedule, right? The clause 2 is buyer's conditions, and we talked about all those inspections and checking all those things. So normally, how many days they will put for the buyer's conditions? Sounds like lots of work to do.
Yeah, you typically see them go longer than like a residential resale because every one of these check boxes involve a third party, and most of them are government. So lots of red tape. I've seen buyer's condition, or I've seen vacant land conditions be 2 months long, especially if environmental assessments involved, because that's like 4 to 6 weeks on its own for a phase 1, isn't it, Chad? Then a 2 is even more.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I guess if you have a experienced builder to help to check those all, then it will be easier.
Yeah, like an experienced builder, like I had Raymar Construction buy a few of my lots down here in Prospect, and I think they had like 4 days conditions, and it was basically a lawyer. But they know what they're doing. They build every day. They'd probably done their due diligence before they even made an offer. They'd walked the lots and done all of it. But if you're doing it yourself and helping a buyer that's green, definitely I would start with 3 to 4 weeks if you're checking the majority of these boxes.
Yeah, okay.
So the last thing I want to throw out there before we wrap it all up is financing. How do you finance vacant land?
Line of credit.
It's a whole new rabbit hole.
It's only installation, mortgage, what to call it? Mortgage installation?
So you can finance a purchase of a lot, but it's not like the same type of financing you would get on a house. Right? So so you have to be aware of that. If somebody wants to say, "Oh, I've got a 5% down payment," you're not going to be buying a lot because you can't finance 95% or even 80%. I think the requirement now is, some banks told me you have to have 35% down, but most banks want 50% down. So if you buy a $100,000 lot, you have to have $50,000 down payment to get it financed.
Yeah. And I know a couple of buddies of mine, like they've run into this. If you want to use the lot as your down payment for your self-build, like you need to own it free and clear. You can't have it financed or sitting on a line of credit.
And some of the banks, sorry, don't put my mask on. Okay, and some of the banks actually will say that you have to own the land for a year before you can actually use it as collateral against a mortgage.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good to know.
So it depends on who you're working with. Again, they just need to go back and ask all the details, right? So that there's no surprises if they're planning on using this, because then the bank will have it reassessed and they'll look at the increased value maybe of what they paid for it. So it can change from lender to lender.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So although I gotta say, I just enjoy how Janice took over that monitor with her shoe. I'm not sure how she did that, but I'm like, major boss lady move right there.
Yeah, right. That was great.
I saw the stiletto and I saw a single white female. I know where I was
there's no stilettos today. There's just sparkly sneakers.
Yeah, nice. Oh my. Rich. So yeah, financing, when you're looking at it, if somebody just wants to buy and sit on a vacant lot, that's great. But if they want to build on it, you have to talk to them about the ability to finance and the ability to finance a construction project, right? So you can't buy a lot and then do a turnkey package through a builder. The builder has to, turnkey means all of the above, land and building. So you cannot do and finance a turnkey package, which makes it much more difficult for the buyer to get the approval on it.
Okay, so Chad, that brings up something interesting, because I'm running into a lot of buyers with buyer fatigue who are now looking at doing exactly that, or trying to figure out how to do that, where they want, like, hey, I got this perfect lot, I want to build there. Can I just engage a builder and get them to work with me on land that I buy? Yep. And I've advised them against it, but obviously not for the right reasons. Like I would just tell them it's way too much cost and stress, and
there's more to it. There's more steps to it. It's a little bit more detailed and a little bit more complex when it comes to buying the land, having the builder come in and do a contract agreement. It's not a turnkey new construction agreement, it's a contract agreement. And then there's a little bit more involved. There's pros and cons to both, right? So look at it this way. I currently, because I just checked my text messages, Scott Sims is getting back to me because I'm engaging with Marchand Homes. I have a very good relationship with Scott, and he's their new operations manager. Got clients coming in from London, Ontario. They came in last week. We looked around at a bunch of houses and they were very discouraged. So now they want to talk because I threw the idea of building, because they were like, we need to make this change and that change and this change to every house. And I said, well, why don't you just build? Do you have time? So now we're looking into that. They have the privilege of coming in and buying the lot and doing a construction agreement, right? So that's not a problem. There's going to be a cost savings element to that, in that their budget is around $750,000, $800,000 to build the house. So in a turnkey situation, that's going to be a $10,000 deed transfer cost. However, if you close on the land for $100,000, different story, $1,500, right? Because you don't pay deed transfer on the build, only the transfer of the land and title, right? So there's a savings element to that. And I said, well, if you do that, and they're paying cash, they're not financing this purchase or build, so they can do that. And then they'll get a contract agreement in place and we'll build them the house that they want on their land when they close. But not everybody's in a position, and builders, not all builders will do this, by the way. When you do a turnkey package, the builder has to finance the whole thing until closing day. And not every builder would be willing to do that, especially outside of a development, right? If you pick a piece of land, you know, half an hour from Halifax and say, oh, Mr. Builder, I want you to go and buy that lot and build me a house, and we'll do a turnkey deal and I'll buy it all from you on closing. Okay, well, that's risk that the buyer or the builder probably doesn't want to absorb if something happens and that buyer doesn't end up closing on the property, right? That's happened a number of times in this market where buyers are not. Our team right now, I have to, Anita's online here now. We have a closing that didn't happen because the buyer's house didn't close in Ontario. So they're renting the house that they are supposed to be closing on. But at one point, the seller of this property out in Fall River, if they decide, I don't want to extend this anymore, get out of the house, and we're going to sell it to somebody else. Okay, they're going to lose their deposit and things are going to go south pretty quick. A builder has that risk. If they decide to take a turnkey package and buy a piece of land they never had the intention of buying, right? So they will ask for a pretty substantial sized deposit on that. So the one I built out in Pockwalk, Marchand Homes, we had the agreement of purchase and sale already accepted because lots were flying off the shelf in March of 2020 right to end of June 2020. They were just, well, Alex, that's when you sold most of your lots down of Towers Road, wasn't it?
Yep, 7 lots in 3 months.
Right. They were flying off the shelf. So what we did is we rushed in and we got the agreement of purchase and sale for the vacant land tied up between my buyer and the landowner. But then we assigned that contract to Marchand Homes, and they took over so I had to do the buyer designated brokerage agreement and working with a real estate industry firm, signed up with Marchand Homes. And they went in and did the build and the turnkey package to close for my client. So that's how we handled that when we got the agreement of purchase and sale accepted privately. They came over and we assigned it to them, and they did a turnkey package. With doing that, they had to put a substantial deposit in place. And I think we ended up going $25,000 as a deposit, right? Because it's high risk for a builder who didn't intend on buying a lot and building a house custom to this particular party. So they wanted $25,000. So we put $10,000 initially, and then 15 after all conditions were met, or a month and a half into the build or something.
I'm gonna watch this one too. So most of you know my husband's a builder, and there are times that he has buyers just buy the land or clients buy the land, but then they also do a draw mortgage because of the way that their financing is able to be set up. So that's an option for some buyers as well. And some lawyers have actually recommended that it's a good way to do it, because then if anything happens to the builder, the client actually owns the land, not the builder, right? Where it gets wrapped up. And we were also told by an accountant, just be careful as real estate agents that we're not encouraging people to buy land separately so that they can avoid the deed transfer tax, because it can be viewed by the government as tax evasion or tax fraud. So I just put that out there since this is being recorded.
Yeah, you didn't hear it from me, guys.
Silva will appreciate that.
You didn't hear it from me.
I was shocked when they said that. I was really surprised.
Yeah.
Like, wow, we're working for our buyers. And then,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So
Anyway,
at the end of the day, going in and looking at the tax element on vacant land too, guys, there's different criteria when HST is applicable and not applicable on vacant land. You guys know that?
No, that's good to know. No.
Is it here all day, guys?
Is it if it's a corporation or not?
Well, if it's a commercial piece of land owned by a business being transferred to another party, then yes, it's subject to HST. It's because it's commercial, right? It's business to business. So here's one of the things that I was in a debate with over a client of mine. He wanted to, okay, I've got this great big, I don't know what it was, 200 and some acre parcel of land. Nobody really wants all of this land. Maybe it would be easier for me to just chunk it up into 25 acre lots and sell it that way, or what's that? So I said, well, you better be careful, because now all of a sudden it's HST applicable, right? Right now you're offering it at a certain price and it's HST exempt because of the title of the property, and it's just residential or resource zoned. So it's not commercially zoned, so HST wouldn't be charged automatically. This was conveyed 3 times in the past, this big 200 acre parcel of land. So it was exempt from HST. So you think, but the government looks at it and says, well, okay, this is resource land, and HST is only exempt if you're using it for personal use, but they deem it, that after so many hectares, I think it's like 2 hectares of land, they deem anything over and above that is HST applicable, right? Now, nobody's really, the government or Revenue Canada has never challenged anybody on that to date. Not that I've spoke to a couple of lawyers about that, but it's not been challenged to date. But if you start subdividing off a parent parcel of land and start selling them off for profit, then you're likely going to have to add HST to the purchase price. I would lean on a tax lawyer or an accountant, a chartered accountant, to give you the ruling on that, to say, okay, if my client wants to subdivide and sell it off, would it be HST applicable? I understand you can do it once without HST implications, but more than once, then it is for profit and you have to charge.
and it's considered new land.
It's new land, absolutely, yep. It's an infant parcel created from the parent parcel. I've been told, so take this for what it is, but verify it before you go forward with a transaction on a newly created lot, whether it's HST applicable or exempt. And when you're listing it, in our contracts, it says that the seller is to provide notice to the buyer whether it is or isn't subject to HST. So it's the seller's responsibility to verify it, because ultimately it's their responsibility to collect it if it's applicable. So if they sell it for $100,000 and then Revenue Canada says, oh, by the way, you owe us HST on that sale, it comes off the 100,000, not 100,000 plus HST. They should have collected it.
So this is where, sorry. So this is where sometimes you really want to pull in accountants, because if it's inherited land, does the person that's inherited the land actually know what the history of it is and whether or not HST should be applicable, or what is going to be their what's the phrase I'm looking for?
Sorry, I was reading Iris's message.
Oh, okay. When you capital gains.
Oh, capital gains tax.
Right. So
and inheritance tax.
Yeah, exactly. So if it's an inheritance, pull in an accountant for sure, because you want to make sure you get those checks and balances so there's no surprises, because everything that they think that they're going to make on it might be gone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. At least 20 some odd % is payable to the tax man.
So crazy.
Okay, Iris, yeah, there's a lot of different builders that would do turnkey packages. I priced up 3 with 3
Yeah.
builders. So the ones that I have the best relationship with is Marchand Homes. I've got a Marchand home being built right now off Hargrove Lane and off Powers Road and Prospect, and I've had one out in Pockwalk built by Marchand Homes. Both of those are quite capable and interested in doing business, and they can do turnkey construction, no problem. Evan Collins used to work for Austin Contracting, but now he's Collins Construction. He was willing to do a turnkey package for us. Some of the other builders are busy, so you might not get them to commit to doing it, but yeah, just there's a lot of builders out there. Give them a shot, call them and ask them. I've got clients that would like to buy a private piece of property and build potentially through you. Would you be interested in and willing to do a turnkey construction deal? And they'll say yes or no. And I called a few and they said, no, we wouldn't be interested. Right.
Okay. All right, I will try. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, that's all I have for you guys.
Yep, I gotta run anyway.
That was incredible. Thank you. Chad, it does remind me very strongly of Wednesday nights where my brain is actually full. So thank you for that. I've kind of missed it. I really have. So yeah, I'm gonna have to come crash one of your meetings just to get my fix of all the learning, because that was awesome. And Alex, thank you so much for your input. Truly appreciate it. And John, of course, who had to take off, but that was very cool.
Excellent. All right, go sell some land.
Yeah. Cool. See you later.
I feel a lot more
Thank you
confident now.
all.
Thank you.
Take care, guys.
Hey, Janice. Bye. Thanks.